So in this video, we're going to talk about some important aspects of modern campaigns. It's fair to say campaigns have evolved a lot, even over the past few election cycles. Some of these concepts that are listed here in your flashcards, they're a little bit abstract. They're not about defining the definitions of specific terms, but rather understanding big changes and big shifts in how campaigns have been run in the modern era. The first thing I'm going to point out is a dependence on professional consultants. I scroll down, I have a picture here of Paul Manafort. Maybe you recognize him. Paul Manafort is actually in prison right now. He was for a time, campaign manager of the Donald Trump campaign. And I mention him not to make a statement about Donald Trump or his politics, but rather to point out that a lot of times campaign managers are brought in from the outside of a particular candidate's inner circle, and they may or may not do a good job. And in the case of Paul Manafort, he clearly came with a lot of baggage. He ended up losing his position as campaign manager, and he eventually got prosecuted for some financial-related crimes. Point being that who you bring in is part of the story. When you talk about large modern campaigns, you can often have shakeups in the campaign staff and change your manager if they want to have a different style and a different technique. Remember, they're running a really large organization, an organization of paid staff, of volunteers, travel schedules, organizing events, running ad buys. So, they are often at the very core of what the candidate is doing and how they're conducting their campaign. It's also worth noting that sometimes when candidates get into a presidential race late in the field, some of the quote-unquote experienced campaign managers or campaign consultants, they'll have already been taken. There's a lot of times there's a competition early in a presidential race to hire staffers who have experience running campaigns. And so you have campaign managers who can run in campaigns for multiple candidates over multiple election cycles. So they don't just stick with one person. If we talk about fundraising, we can certainly have a pretty broad conversation. We'll talk in another video about campaign finance separately, but the fact that candidates have to raise so much money plays a big part in what they can do on the campaign trail and what kind of message they can send. I actually have a video clip from a recent 2020 primary debate between Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren about this very issue. I'm going to go ahead and play that now.
So the mayor just recently had a fundraiser that was held in a wine cave full of crystals and served $900 a bottle wine. Think about who comes to that. He had promised that every fundraiser he would do would be open door, but this one was closed door. We made the decision many years ago that rich people in smoke-filled rooms would not pick the next president of the United States. Billionaires in wine caves should not pick the next president of the United States.
Mr. Mayor, your response. According to Forbes magazine, I am literally the only person on this stage who's not a millionaire or a billionaire. So this is important. This is the problem with issuing purity tests you cannot yourself pass. If I pledge never to be in the company of a progressive Democratic donor, I couldn't be up here. Senator, your net worth is 100 times mine. Now, supposing that you went home feeling the holiday spirit, I know this isn't likely, but stay with me, and decided to go on to PeteForAmerica.com and give the maximum allowable by law, $2,800. Would that pollute my campaign because it came from a wealthy person? No, I would be glad to have that support. We need the support from everybody who is committed to helping us defeat Donald Trump.
So if we think about that video and think about the debate that is being had there's a broad conversation about money and politics. And although we'll talk about this more in our campaign finance video, it's important to highlight the fact that anyone running for president has to raise huge amounts of money. They can have different tactics and strategies for doing this. They can do it over small donations, internet donations, which was really pioneered in 2004 with the campaign of Howard Dean. Or they can do it in larger donations or in quote-unquote wine caves, what Elizabeth Warren seems to have such a problem with. Point being, it's got to come from somewhere. And if you're going to be a viable candidate, you have to spend a lot of money, and that can take a lot of time. And if we look back at some statistics of the spending in 2016, these numbers, these massive numbers, they're actually a decline from the previous election cycle where Barack Obama raised huge amounts of money. But they just point out the huge sums of money that are being spent both by the campaigns themselves and then also by outside groups. And these numbers, they really are not tracking all of the outside spending. And so we'll talk about some of the outside spending that happens in modern campaigns as well in that other video. The other thing that's worth talking about is the evolution of social media. If you're a social media user, it's likely that in this 2020 primary season, you've seen some advertisements depending on your political affiliation. And there's no doubt you're going to see other political advertisements pop up in your feed, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever platforms it is that you're on. It's a huge way that candidates are now reaching out to voters. You know, television advertisement has been a part of the modern campaign since the 1950s and 60s, but we've really entered into a new era in which now, instead of just choosing regions and cities and media markets to run their ads, they can literally target specific people, specific age groups, specific voter tendencies depending on what they're searching on their Google search or who they're connected with on their social network. So the campaigns now have a huge data-driven effort to try to target their advertising. And when you see an advertisement on your political feed, you can be pretty confident that there's an algorithm or a reason that that advertisement popped up on your feed. There's something about your internet behavior that has caused it to do that. That doesn't mean you've been individually selected by a person, but a computer algorithm has done that. That's changing modern campaigning as we speak. And these big businesses, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they're under a lot of pressure to be monitoring campaign ad for truth and honesty. And that's a modern political issue that I think every campaign is still figuring out. And that's what I mean when I say this isn't something we can just sit down and memorize, but rather we have to understand the broad concepts of what's happening and think and evaluate whether or not that's a good way to make decisions about who we vote for in a democratic society. And it's going to continue to evolve right before our eyes, and it's going to have a huge impact in the 2020 campaign. So those topics, those issues are worth thinking about, and I think if you look back at the flashcards, we've covered those in some way. Well, we should also point out, I didn't mention the duration of the election cycle. We're looking at basically a perpetual presidential election campaign. You know, the minute somebody wins the presidency, there's already discussion about who's going to be running in the next election 4 years down the road. And now we're seeing a situation where presidential candidates will announce their campaign or exploring their campaign as early as 2 years prior to an election. So this can make running for president a really, really long ordeal and an expensive ordeal. And again, you have that question about whether or not it's good for the country to be in constant campaign mode. But these are interesting and important aspects of modern campaigns that we all need to be reflecting on.